Hey everyone, so this is part 2 of building your own ChatGPT front end in Python. So in the previous lesson, what we did is we went through the very basics. We made sure that we had Python and PyCharm installed. We made sure that we had an open API or an OpenAI API key, and we built a very simple Python app that used the OpenAI library in Python to call ChatGPT. So now what we're going to do this time is we're going to refactor the fast API program into a more logical structure, because what we want to be able to do is access a MySQL database to get our chat history, and then we want to be able to store and retrieve chat messages. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go into PyCharm. We're going to start another new project. I'm going to start it from the beginning again just to reinforce what we're doing. All right, so I'm going to go over to my browser, and I am going to go to my repository for the ChatGPT API Part 2. Okay, so I'm going to use this as a starting spot. I'm going to start with main.py. Okay, and what I'm going to do now is go back over to my PyCharm, and I'm going to create a new project. So I'm going to go New Project. We're going to create a Fast API project, and this one we're going to just let it be called Fast API Project 2. We're going to create it in this window. Okay, so you can see, just like last time, when we created our Fast API project, it imported Fast API from Fast API. It created an object called app, which is of class Fast API, and it created these two endpoints, a root endpoint that says hello world, and then another one that says hello to somebody else. So what I want to do now is I want to create a class that I'm going to put my ChatGPT code in. That last time in part 1, we put that into main.py. This time, I'm not going to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say create new file, and then I am going to call it openai.py. Okay, so now I have created a new Python file inside of my project. So now I'm going to go back to I called it chatgpt.py over here, so why don't I change that? So let me copy this first. I'm going to go back over to my PyCharm IDE, and I'm going to create a new file called chatgpt.py. Okay, so I'm going to paste in the beginnings of this. So what I'm going to do is, let me comment this out first. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I need to have OpenAI. So let me go down, open a terminal, and I'm going to go pip install OpenAI. Okay, so now I have OpenAI installed. And so now what I'm doing here in line 6 is I'm defining a class called myOpenAI. And then on line 8, what this is the constructor of the class. And in this case, I'm not actually going to do anything in the class. I am just going to put a pass in there just so that I have it there if I come back to it later to add something in. So what I want to do is I'm going to start by creating a function inside here called chat. And I'm going to say def chat. And I'm going to make this a static method. So I'm going to use the decorator static method. Then I'm going to say def chat, and then prompt, and then that's going to be a string. So I'm creating a function inside of my OpenAI class that is going to get called from the main Fast API endpoints. So let me go back to my ChatGPT inside of here. inside of my GitHub. And so the first thing I'm going to do is I want to do the stuff that we had done before. So I'm going to start by getting my API key. So in the last lesson, what we did is we had this line where we've imported OpenAI. Now we're going to say OpenAI.API key equals, and then we're opening a text file for read only, and we're stripping out the carriage return. So in this case, we are setting our API key to whatever is in this file. Then the next thing we did was we did a completion. So let me come back over here. And what we did is we did a completion. So in this case, we did completion equals OpenAI chat completion. Oh, I need to delete this OpenAI py file that I created. Okay. Okay, so now we have a class called myOpenAPI, or myOpenAI. I have a completion record. Now in the completion record, remember, we did it sort of like this, where we had messages, and we said role, and then it was user, and then comma, content is what is the diameter of the moon. Okay. And so, and then in this case, it's going to go out, it's going to run this, and we're just going to say return completion. So what we've done at this point is we have created a static method that we can call from main.py, and it is going to call the completion method in OpenAI, and it's going to return the answer to what is the diameter of the moon. So now I'm going to go back to main.py, and inside of the get, I'm going to call it chat. So the only thing we're going to have is we're going to have let's actually make it a post. We have a post called chat, and then we're going to call it chat, and it's going to have a prompt as a string. And then what it's going to do, we want to say up here, we want to say from ChatGPT import myOpenAI. And so now we're going to call myOpenAI.chat with the prompt. And in this case, we're actually just going to return it. So all we're doing here is we've got one endpoint called chat. It has a variable called prompt that we're actually not using yet. And then we're calling myOpenAI, which is in the class we just created, and we're calling it passing in the prompt. So I'm going to say run. And now it's running, so I'm going to go back to Fast API. I am going to just go to docs. And now we have our chat. So I'm going to go into here, and I'm going to say try it out. And then I just need to put something in the prompt, and I execute it. So now you see that it has gone out, and it is called ChatGPT. And now it said the diameter of the moon is approximately 3,474 kilometers. So we're basically back to where we were in part one. We have now, in our Python code, instead of putting all of the code inside of the main.py, we have created a ChatGPT.py, and we now call the chat function from inside of the main.py. This is just a better way to go. Your main.py for your fast API projects should basically just have endpoints in it. You should import whatever other classes you need and then call them. But for the most part, main.py should just have endpoints in it. So now the next thing I want to do is I want this to be dynamic. So I want it to use this prompt. So I'm going to go back to the ChatGPT and I'm going to say role user, content, and then I'm just going to change this string and put prompt in it. So now when I hit Command S and I resave it and I go out here, let's reload it. So now when I say try it out, I could say, what is the diameter of the Earth? And hit execute. And now it's going to take what I passed in as this prompt, and now I get a response from the assistant that says the equatorial diameter of the Earth is approximately 12,742 kilometers. Okay, so now we have our API that takes the prompt value and it sends it all the way in, and it gets all the way to ChatGPT 3.5, and then it returns a result. So now what we want to do is we want to start storing all of this in a database so that we can have chat history. So the next thing I'm going to do that is I am going to create a new file, and it's going to be called data source. So let me actually go, before I do that, let me just go back and make sure that that's what I called it over here. It's datasource.py. Okay, so datasource.py, let me just copy this first. So we're going to come over in PyCharm, and I'm going to create datasource.py. Okay, and so the first thing I need to do in here is I'm going to do some imports. Now, the things I need is I need JSON because I'm working in JSON. I need these other libraries that have to do with accessing a MySQL database. So in order to get that, I'm going to open up my terminal, and I'm going to do pip install py mysql. And as soon as I do that, we'll see that the red line goes away. And then now I need to do a pip install of mysql.connector. Okay, so now I don't actually have any errors anymore. So now what I want to do is I want to create a database class. And to do that, I'm going to say class DB. And then now I'm going to create the class. So the first thing I want to do is I want to connect to the MySQL database. Now I have a MySQL database out here. Let me go up to it. It's actually on another server. And so inside of it, I have created a table called My Chat. And this table has 4 columns. It has an ID, which is just a primary key. It has a column called Create Timestamp, which will just put the timestamp, the current timestamp of when the record was created. And then it has the information from our chat, the role and the content. So this is a simple enough table. And if I'm over here in my SQL Workbench, I can do a select star from my chat. And you see I don't have any records in it. So now let me go back to my PyCharm. And now what I want to do is I want to access this database. So the first thing I need to do to access the database is I need to know the connect string. So I'm going to go over to my terminal. And so I created a file called pwd.json, and it's in my home directory. And so in there, I have the host, the username, the password, and the database. Now, this is all fake. You notice it's pwd.jso. The actual JSON file has the actual connection string to connecting to the database. So I'm connecting to a database on a host using a username and a password, and I'm opening a database. So in order to do that, let's go back and see how we did that with a class method. So the first thing I did is created a class method called connect. And this is actually everything that is in this class. So let me copy it and bring it back over. Okay, so let's look at what this does. So this class method reads the MySQL connection information from the myPassword file and then creates a connection. So I have a connection vault. I have a pwd.json that is sitting at my user's user on my Mac. And then what it's going to do, it's going to open it as a connection file. It's going to use the JSON load command to turn it into a dictionary. So what that's actually doing is it's going to read it, it's going to open it, then it's going to make a dictionary out of it, and then I'm going to run the py-mysql connect command to connect to the host name, with the user, with the password, and then with the database name. Now the other thing I'm doing, and this is critical if you use varchar, and especially if you use long varchar, I'm also opening the database with a cursor class of dict cursor, meaning the records are returned as an associative array. And if that's a PHP term that I'm not sure comes over to Python, but what it's going to let me do now is when it returns the record from the table, it's going to do it, and I'm going to get the column names in the JSON object. So now, so what this is this is the foundation class that is just going to connect to the database. Now the next thing I need to do is I'm going to create a SQL data class. And what I'm doing there is I'm creating some methods in there that I use all the time. That way I do not need to remember all my MySQL and remember that I need to connect, open the cursor, execute, do a fetch all. I'm just writing this database class so I don't have to worry about it anymore. So the first function I'm going to write so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create the initializer. I'm going to create, which is the constructor, and I'm going to create the first static method. So when I'm over here in Python, I now create a class called SQL Data. Now the SQL Data class is inheriting the DB class that I just created. And so I do that by passing that in as the parameter. So we're passing the data source in. Then when I do my constructor, this super function .init is going to call it's going to initialize the DB. Now again, I actually don't have an initialize in the DB, so it doesn't really matter that much, but I copy and paste that into all my code just so that I know I have it. It's not something that is easy enough to remember. Okay, so now I'm creating a static method called SQL. And what the static method is doing is it is connecting to the database, it's opening a cursor, it is executing the cursor, it's fetching all the records and returning them. So that lets me make a statement like this. I can go SQL equals select star from table name, and then I can execute it as SQL data.sql with this SQL variable, and then now it's going to run it, it will return all the records, and I will be able to use them. So this is my SQL function. Now this returns a list, okay? So when it does a fetch all, it's going to return a list of dictionaries, a list of dict objects. Now what I want to do though is I want to have one method where all I do is I just get one record. So if I have something like select count star from some table, and I know it's going to return one record, what I've decided I like to do is have this function called SQL 0, and then I can just call SQL 0, and it is going to return one row. And it always returns one row. So the only difference between SQL and SQL 0 is that I have a fetch 1 in there. Okay, so then the next thing I want to do in here is I want to have an execute function. And the idea behind that is I want to have something where I could say, you know, delete from so-and-so table or update. So anything that I have a query that changes data, I can call the execute function. So now in this case, I just say execute, I connect to the database, I create a cursor, I run the execute, and then I run a commit. So this is for things that are going to be updating the database. So if I said, update my chat, set role equals system, where ID equals 1, this is what I would call it with. I would call it with the execute. Okay, now last function for this, and then we can get onto the more fun stuff. The last function for this, and the reason I'm going through the process of writing this is I use this all the time. When I get started working on stuff, especially with machine learning, I do not want to worry about my databases. So in this case, we are going to create a function called post. And this is so that I do not have to create insert statements. I can just create a dictionary record and let it do everything for me. So I'm going to paste this in, and let me just walk through what this does. So I'm creating a function called post. Now, if I were to create a dictionary object that looked like this, let's say I created dict equal table name is my chat, action is update, and then role is system, and content is what is the diameter. Okay, so if I create a dictionary record like this and call it by going SQL data.post and then the dictionary, what it's going to do, because there's no ID in here, it is going to insert a new record into the table called my chat. And now insert, I could have this be insert or update. And insert and update kind of work the same, and you'll see that in a second. So if I create this dictionary and then run post, it's going to insert this record into the my chat table. It's going to insert it. Now if I want to update, if I say ID and then it's 17, in this case what it's going to do is because there is an ID out here, it is going to update the record with an ID of 17. There's also a naming convention to this. If we go back to the MySQL, you see, if I go in and I do a describe of my chat, there's a naming convention. An ID and create timestamp actually means something, and the ID is created with the auto update. So let me show you why that actually is important in the code. All right, so in my post, the first thing I do is I check to see if a value ID for exists in the post that I post in. So if there is no ID in my dictionary, I set my ID to 0. Otherwise, I set my ID to the ID. Next thing I do is I check to see if there's an action in the dictionary. And if there is not an action, I set my action to insert. Otherwise, I set my action to whatever's in the dictionary. So then I check to see if there's a table name in the dictionary. If there's not a table name in the dictionary, I just return a 900 error and I just get out. So what I do then is, so now I should have 3 variables. I have a my ID, a my action, and a table name. So what I'll do is I'll connect to the database, then I'll create a cursor. Now, if my action is insert or update, I am going to insert or update a record. So if I don't have an ID, or my ID is blank, so it's either at this point, we know we've created the variable because if it didn't exist, we created it. So it's either going to be 0 or some other value. So if it's 0, we're going to insert into the table name, and we're going to insert just the now for the create timestamp. So all we're doing in this case is we're just there is no ID, so we know that we're doing an insert. So we're going to insert it, then we're going to commit it, then we're going to run, we're going to get the last insert ID. So in this case, what we're doing is we're setting my ID to the primary key of the record that we just inserted. So now this is some interesting code because it's not fast, but it's easy to use. So what we're going to do is in this loop for key in my dictionary, which is all of the columns that are in that dictionary record, we're going to loop through them. And if the key is not table name, ID, create timestamp, or action, we're going to update the table and set the key equal to whatever the value is. So basically what we're doing is we created that dictionary record. We created the record in my chat. And then we loop through each of the columns and make sure that the columns are set. Now, if the action is a delete, we're just going to delete the records out of here. So this function is quite useful. I use this actually all the time, especially if the stuff I'm working on is not really data related. I'm not trying to optimize my database. I'm just trying to push stuff and pull stuff from the database. So now I've created my data source. So what I want to do is go back to my ChatGPT.py, and now from data source, I'm going to import SQL data. Because what I want to do next is I want to create this message on the fly. So let's do it kind of in a couple of steps. So I'm going to create something called messages. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say messages equals an empty list. Then I'm going to say message equals, and then this one is going to be a dict. So I'm going to say role is user, and then content is prompt. So what we're now going to do down here is, and then now what I have to do is I need to make sure that message is part of messages. So what I do there is I say messages dot append and then message. And I need to make sure that I got the right variable. And this is why I like PyCharm. That little yellow line underneath told me I was using the wrong variable. Okay, so now we have a list called messages. It has one dictionary record in it called, which was this message. And now I can come over here and I can replace this with messages. So this messages that is now in my completion create is now coming from something that we created dynamically. So what I want to do is I'm going to do a save all. And now I'm going to go back and I'm going to test it because I don't want to take too many steps ahead without knowing we got things fixed. Okay, so our parameter is what is the diameter of the Earth. We're going to say what is the diameter of Mars, and then we're going to hit execute. Okay, so we got a message from the assistant that said the diameter of Mars is approximately 6,779 kilometers. So now we know that we can do this on the fly, and we can create that messages variable on the fly. So then now the next thing I want to do is I want to save my prompt and my completion. So now what we've already done is we said from data source import SQL data. So what I want to do is I want to insert that message into the database. So I'm going to say post equals, and then we're going to create a dictionary, and we're going to say table name, if I could type, is my chat. Action is an insert. Role is a user. Oops. And then content is the prompt. So what this is going to do is I'm creating a dictionary, and then I'm going to go SQL data.post, and I'm going to post it. So now what's going to happen is when we run this, it is going to put the prompt in the database. But what we also want to do is at the end, we want to put the completion in the database. So instead of just doing return completion, we need to figure out where the role and the content come from in the completion. So let's look at one of the last ones we did. So if we look at this response body, you see that we have this object here. The object then has an array of choices, and the first choice, which is array 0, has something called message, and then it has role and content. So inside my code, what I want to do is, so it's choices 0 message role. So over here I say role equals completion choices 0 message role. And then content equals completion choices 0 message content. And then we're going to do the same thing we did before, but this time we are going to insert the role as the variable role and the content as the variable content. And so what this is going to do for us is it's going to save the prompt that we put in, and then it's going to save the completion that came back. So let me do a save all on this, and let's see if I type this from memory properly. So we're going to go over here. Let me just reload. Okay, so we're going to start with our prompt. We're going to try it out. So we're going to say, what is the diameter of the moon? And hit execute. Okay, the diameter of the moon is approximately 3474. But what's important is we can now go back to our database, and when I say select star from my chat, I have user said what is the diameter of the moon, and the assistant responded the diameter of the moon is approximately 3474 kilometers. Now, if I went in and my next prompt was, what is it made of? Okay, unless I pass this chat history in, ChatGPT is not going to know that we're talking about the moon. So the next thing I want to do is I want to query our chat history and then use our chat history to in the messages. So we started here with messages. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a SQL statement, which is select role content from my chat order by ID. And then I'm going to say message list equals SQL data dot SQL. And then I'm going to pass the SQL in. So now we're going to have this thing called a message list. And this message list is going to return all of the records from the database. Let me just do this. I'm going to type in return message list. And I'm going to get a few warnings because it definitely doesn't like that. I'm going to do a save all. And so now when I run this, what it's going to do is going to return just what's in the database. So notice down here in my response body, I have two records in the database. What is the diameter of the moon? And the diameter of the moon is approximately 3474 kilometers. So at this point, what I need to do is I need to put that information that I just returned in my message list, I need to put it in the messages. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say for M in message list, and then I'm going to say message equal role, and then the role is going to be m.role, and then I'm going to say content, and then that's going to be m.content. And then what I'm going to do, so now I've got the message, and now I'm going to say messages.append, and I'm going to put the message in it. So what we're doing is we're building a list of messages that is now going to get passed in. So what we've done is we've queried the my chat table. We've got a record set back called message list. Now we're going to loop through each message and message list, and we're going to create a message that we're then going to append to the messages list. And then we're going to do the same thing. We're going to post it to the database so that we've got this ongoing list. We are going to then go to ChatGPT, and we're going to post the response. So the way to test this and hope that I didn't make any mistakes typing, we're going to go save all. Now, so far, what we've got is what is the diameter of the moon, and the diameter of the moon is approximately 3474 kilometers. My next prompt is going to be, what is it made of? Now, ChatGPT knows we're talking about the moon because we're going to pass in our chat history. So the message that gets sent in is going to start with what is the diameter of the moon from the user. Then it's going to say the diameter of the moon is approximately this. Then we're asking, what is it made of? And we get an internal server error. So let me go back to the code. See if I can fix this in just one check. Okay. So the fastest way to fix these internal server errors is mRole is not defined. All right, so in order to make sure, since you don't want to watch me sit here debugging it, I'm just going to go back to the code that I have in the repository because this is all tested. And when I go to chatgpt.py, I forgot that I'm not using PHP. So this message, and actually when I originally wrote this code, I made the same mistake. So it's M and then role. We need to use this. We're not in PHP, so we need to use this syntax where we use the square bracket syntax for the columns. Okay, so I'm going to go back to Swagger, and I'm going to hit execute. And now you see the moon is made up of a rocky material. So it knew that we were talking about the moon. And so, so we can actually ask another question. So now if we go back to our database, if I go select start from my chat, you see we said, what is the diameter of the moon? It gave us an answer. What is it made of? It gave us another answer. Now we can continue this conversation as long as we want. But I want to add something else into the API just because I need to be able to clear this out. We didn't do much in the area of database design here. So what I need to do is I'm going to go up and I want to delete. So we're going to create a function called clear. And so we're going to go into main.py. And then we're going to just say, I'm just going to take this and I'm going to say clear. And then in this case, we're going to say OpenAI clear. And so now we've got another endpoint called clear. We need to go and create this function in ChatGPT. So now I'm going to come over here. I'm going to say define clear. And I want it to be a static method. I'm going to say static method clear, or def clear. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go SQL equals delete from my chat. Then I'm going to say SQL data dot execute SQL, and then return code 0. Okay, so now I'm creating another a static method called clear that is just going to empty my database. So I'm going to come back up to here. I'm going to save it, do a save all. Now what I want to do is go back, hit reload. Okay, so let me close this up. So now I have a new function called clear. So I'm going to go in. I'm going to say try it out. I don't know why it's got a prompt. I do know why it's got a prompt. I'm just going to come back here and get rid of the prompt. And then now I can go back and reload it. Okay. Why does clear still have it? Still have a prompt. Okay, let me go back and do a save all. Oh, that's why. Changed it in the wrong place. All right, we're going to do save all. Now, when I reload it, I've got a clear. So I'm just going to hit try it out, hit execute. Okay, so what that did is that cleared out my chat history. So now what I'm going to do is say, try it out. And I'm going to say, what is the diameter of Mars? It decided to do error for me, so let me go back and see what I did wrong. Oh yeah, I screwed that up. Do a save all again. Okay, so now this time it should work. I am going to hit what is the diameter of Mars. It says the diameter of Mars is so many kilometers. Then I say, how far is it from Earth? Now keep in mind, it's going to know, because we're passing back the conversation, it's going to know that I'm talking about Mars. So it's going to say, the distance between Earth and Mars varies based on positions. So it gave me something and it says something. So in this case, the distance between Earth and Mars varies. Oh, it actually is giving me the answer to the next one. What is it made of? And Mars is primarily composed of silicate rock. So what we've done at this point is we have created a ChatGPT chatbot that we can talk back and forth to, and it is going to keep track of our conversation. Now, this is a pretty basic example, but you'll see as we expand on it and we do more stuff with the database, how powerful it can actually be when you've when you're in a position where you can talk back and forth to a database, you can get data, you can create stuff with a system role. There's a lot we can do. And in the next lesson, we are going to expand on it by using different instructions based on the system role so that we can pull data out of a database in order to give our prompts some context. So I will see you in the next lesson.